Hi, welcome to Haven. This is a podcast that's a safe space for curiosity and conversation. I'm your host, Haven, and today I'm curious, how accurate is a mother's intuition? How accurate is a mother's intuition? I was even going to say, oh, is a mother's intuition real? But surely we can all agree it's definitely real. It's just wondering, well, how much can we trust it and where does it come from? And is it ever wrong? And how do we follow it together? So I think it's first, the intuition to me is just deep. It's instinctual and it's kind of a knowing of how mothers feel when it comes to their children. And it can be actually really hard to explain and measure, I found, as I'm trying to word this of what does it even really mean. But I do think it's widely acknowledged by moms of, yeah, it is a guiding force in our decision making and our nurturing and our protection of our kids. So my guest for this episode is actually a fellow podcaster that is on the Evergreen Network that I signed with. They sent me a list of who do you want to go and be on their podcast and who would you like on yours? And I saw a title, it was called That's Mom Sense. And I was like, okay, intrigued. And I looked it up and it's Kanika Chadda Gupta. And we spoke on the phone. We got introduced by someone on the network and we spoke for an hour about anything and everything. We're like, okay, let's totally do this. I'll come on yours. You come on mine. But Kanika, I'm so glad that you're here and joining us for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Haven. This is such a treat.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how did That's Mom Sense come to be? And was it really based on a moment of something with your intuition, or is it just kind of talking about the general sense? What does that phrase mean to you?
Yes, it came to me when I was just ruminating on titles for my show because I had launched the idea of putting out a podcast, and I have a career in television and broadcast news, and I was like, I need to have a hook, and something in me was like, I always trust my sixth sense. It's my mom sense. It's not nonsense. It's our mom sense. And I was like, that's it. It's sticky, it's catchy, and you get it. And it's not something that's unique to mothers. We all have a gut instinct and an inner knowing. But I think what's so special about this season of life, and if you are a mom, it kind of transfers into how you know so much about what your kid needs without even really being able to explain it. So yeah, that's total mom sense came to be.
I love that. And I never put the connection of it being a play off of nonsense. So now that you said it, I'm like, wow, it's even better than I thought it was.
Oh, thanks.
How old are your kids?
So I have twins. They're 7, and my younger one is 6. So boy, girl twins and a younger son.
Okay. So when it comes to intuition, I'm sure it's different, obviously, for the different ages and genders, and even with twins, they're unique people. But I thought it'd be fun if we can kind of unravel a little bit of the mystery of what is that mother's intuition. And when I was thinking about it, I think the first component for me that comes to mind is connection and instinct. I feel like the mother's intuition is usually invisible and it's the bond between the mother and child. And so I want to think of exploring how this connection is formed and how it evolves as the kid grows. There's when we have these little infants in our arms, I don't know how much taking care of them is intuition. Because for me, when I took these classes about even breastfeeding and sleep, I would have thought, oh, you're hungry all the time. But they're not. A lot of it is oh, that's a sleepy cue cry, or I need to wake them up to eat here. And so part of it feels like sometimes my quote unquote instincts are sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but a lot of it also comes through the connection and knowing the kids. So how has that kind of played out for you of the 3 different children of the unique connections, and sometimes your instincts work and sometimes they don't? I know that's different than intuition, but I feel like that's where it's beginning to be formed, is when these little babies are in our arms.
Yes, yes. You know what? I would say it's even before that.
Mm,
For me, I trusted my inner knowing. This first time around, I actually had suffered an ectopic pregnancy, and I diagnosed it myself with the help of my friend who
wow.
was, yeah, training to be an OB. She was a fellow at the time. But yeah, I told her, these are my HCG levels, and I'm feeling some strange shoulder pain in my left shoulder. And immediately, and this was at like midnight, because I was like, it was after her rounds, and I said, I just need to talk to you, but something's kind of awry. I'm in my first trimester. I don't know what's going on. And when I told her those symptoms, she said, I don't want to scare you, but I think you're having what's called an ectopic pregnancy, which is when the fetus is growing in one of your fallopian tubes. And it's rare, similar to like what happens in a miscarriage, but you have to get it extracted because it's actually fatal for the mother. And it's not a viable pregnancy. So I was like, oh my goodness, I have to like make sure they do an ultrasound and look into this. And of course the nurses just brushed it off and they were like, "Oh yeah, you're fine. It's too early. We're just going to do the blood work and pee on the stick." And I was like, "No, I think I'm having this." And I was relentless, and the doctor did the ultrasound and said, "Yes, your uterus is empty." And so it was at that time that I was like, I better trust these hunches that I have, because they could very well save my life. Um, so that was my first kind of taste of it. And then after I had the kids, there were just so many different moments and milestones because I had 3 and 18 months. One was when, the kids did have a NICU experience, and my daughter was just having a hard time with feeding. And so she was discharged after my son. And believe me, it's so heartbreaking when, we had both of our car seats ready, but we only took
Mm.
one kid home. And I just felt like, oh my God, I'm separating my twins. Like they needed each other's closeness. But we had this angel of a baby nurse who said, I will go to the hospital, do skin to skin with her, and make sure she feeds. While you just learned everything from the lactation consultant. I taught you how to swaddle. You stay with your son and, nurse him and tend to him. And within 24 hours, my daughter was fine. She really benefited from that skin to skin contact with, Maria, our nurse, and she was able to like finish her feeds and like hit the little benchmark that the doctors needed to see, and she was discharged. And even that was mom sense. I couldn't be in two places at once, and I just knew. I was like, she's onto something. We need to basically, divide and make sure that like both kids have their needs met.
It sounds even like in what you had shared, so much of it was the knowing. Like the first is the deep knowing of yourself and your body.
Yeah.
And that was the first instinct. And then even like the knowing of what your children needed, even as they're like freshly outside of the womb. And I think, because I'm thinking too, I was like, my friends who have adopted children, they have intuition with them. Like it doesn't matter when you start building the connection. It's just the fact that the connection is being built. And it's the knowing of who these little people are. But then I think that's also, it needs to take a step further of going from that mind body connection, of like, and whether that really looks like, heightened awareness or pattern recognition or just an understanding of who a child is, it then
Mhm.
needs to go into the trusting yourself, of trusting it, and you advocating for the ultrasound, or you trusting that, yes, this skin to skin is valuable and important. And that kind of thing, I feel like, is where maybe we feel those little inklings and we feel the hunch, and there is that knowing, but then I think we can sometimes kind of pause at the second guessing of trusting it or acting on it. Like, Do you have any kind of memories or stories of where you didn't act on it and you were like, I was totally right in my gut and I didn't?
Yes, I would say at meal times, one big blunder that I made with the twins was I let them have a little tablet on the main table while they were in their high chairs, and was like, okay, this makes it easy. We're gonna have Coco Melon on, and then you get a bite, and you get a bite, and you get a bite, and you
Hmm.
get a bite, and I just thought, okay, fun hack, it's fine. But then I knew something was not quite right about it. I was like, this is mealtime. They should know that this is eventually going to be time that's like sacred to our family where we all look at each other and talk and interact. And here I'm just going through the motions and trying to get it done. And I don't even know if they're tasting their food because they're like, happily listening to nursery rhymes as we go. So I could be feeding
The
them.
creepy little JJ family is just moving around. I mean, the differences of
Yes,
seasons in that show alone, it's either
yes.
like early seasons haunting or just like too real as the seasons get later.
It's so true. It's so true. You see the animation evolve. Um, but then when they got older, that's what they wanted at meal times. And I was like, oh my goodness,
Hmm.
what have I started? So with my third, we were adamant about that. We were just like, nope, that we're not doing the tablets in the kitchen anymore, and you're gonna see your food. It's a sensorial experience. You get to pick it up, you get to try something new, whatever. If it ends up on the floor, so be it. And then I didn't do as much of the spoon feeding with him. I did more of the toddler-led weaning, where
Hmm.
they need to, pick up the grains of rice and the pieces of bread and the veggies, touch it, feel it, smell it, taste it, hear the crunch. Like it has to be like all the senses engaged, so that they actually enjoy mealtime. And yeah, that was something that if I could go back, I would have trusted that little hunch because I was like, no, this is a hack. I'm going to just go with it.
Well, I feel like also it's sometimes it is like there's reasons. Sometimes we don't trust it. Sometimes it's not that we're second guessing that it's right or wrong. Sometimes we're just like, no, it's not convenient. Like
Yes, yes,
I would
exactly.
just like them to eat food right now. Sometimes it's not even like a, certain scenario. Or do you think that the mother, like the mother's intuition in particular, can it be nurtured and developed, or do you think it's more of like an innate ability?
Wow, great question. I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's something that is very instinctual. It's in our biology. Somehow, we all have this, we all have an intuition that we should use to channel all that we do. Because life's just, you could just chalk it all up to choices. It's this choice over another, from what am I having to breakfast and who am I going to marry? It's all a series of choices. And your intuition just is at peace when you know that you're like making the right choice. But then the other side of it is it's something that can be nurtured and learned because it's more, I guess, to trust it. That's what we're nurturing, the
Hmm.
ability to trust. Because we are going to make mistakes. You're not going to always know exactly how to chart your path, and you somehow course correct. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Do you think that it can ever be misused or manipulated?
So what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, the reason I thought of this is because we were watching Tangled as a family,
Uh huh.
and there was that song, Mother Knows Best, that Mother Gothel is singing. And my daughter, who's 4, she turned to me and she goes, do mothers know best?
Wow.
And I could tell she's trying to put the pieces together of this. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And she goes, well, that's what Gothel is saying, but it seems like she's trying to trick Rapunzel. And I was like, she is, isn't she? She's definitely trying to trick Rapunzel. And she goes, yeah, because Rapunzel trusts her and thinks she's safe, but she's not a safe person.
Right.
And I was just thinking, oh my gosh, like, and I would say that Mother Gothel is technically not a mother, not intuition, but I think she was projecting on Rapunzel this outside world is dark and scary and not okay because she was manipulating her, or maybe that was her experience of the world and kind of putting it on there. And so I wonder if ever, as mothers, do we ever misuse whether it's our intuition or our projection of our own faults or something in a way that actually can harm our kids?
Mm. Yeah, no, I think that's such an interesting way to think about it. And we are human first and foremost. And just in that, we're imperfect in beings. So we don't always know best. We're always going to make mistakes. We are meant to. And so I think that's something that we have to be transparent to the kids about. I know for me, like, I have found myself apologizing to my 5-year-old. If I yelled and lost it and was just having a really hard day and just needed them to get in the car and, close the minivan door because we are late. I have a moment where I'm like, I'm going to take a breath and then say, you know what? Mom was really, really stressed just now. And I'm sorry. I shouldn't have yelled. Things got heightened. And that's why I did. But just know that, when you help and you do things fast and get in the car and it just, it's better. But I don't have, like, I can control my reaction. And I think back to my childhood, I am the child of immigrants. My parents immigrated from India with me when I was 2.5 years old. And culturally, elders never apologize to their kids. They are just like, we're older than you. We are supposed to be respected and revered. And what we say is law, and that is
Mhm.
something that I feel like is misused. And I can speak to it from my experience, and I just think, no, we all are, going to make mistakes at times. And I think it's important for us to call it out. And I'm glad that I am doing a reframe as I raise my kids.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful component of like the culture you came from and appreciating what it really led to who you are today, but then also these are the things I want to change and adjust. And, maybe what I say isn't always law or right. And that's a hard thing to kind of toggle between of like wanting to trust yourself, but also I'm fallible. I can make mistakes. For me, I think it's hard to try and pull together of what is instinct and what's like maybe even my own wounding or triggering. Like
Mm.
I remember again, like my daughter, she is a soft-natured sweetheart. Like she's so tender, so nurturing, like so lovely. And so I remember seeing her play with a friend once, and the friend kept taking her toys from her. And I was getting activated. I was like, I try and let him work it out, but I just wanted to be like, listen, kid, if you take
Yeah.
that toy one more time, just like wanting to. And so afterwards, I was talking with Isley, and I was like, hey, I noticed that kid was taking your toys a lot. She goes, yeah. And I said, what did you think about that? She was like, well, he wanted the toy and I could play with another one. And I had to pause myself because I was thinking, like, advocate for yourself. Here's what you can say. Here's what you can do because that's my personality and that's what I would do.
Mm-hmm.
But she's an entirely different person. It was not bothering to her. Like,
Right.
she didn't mind. Like, it wasn't an issue. And I was about to make it an issue for her when
Yeah.
she is maybe more flexible and more understanding. And now, especially as her brother gets older, I've seen her advocate for herself. She's got it within her. Like, I think that's the gift of a sibling too, is it really draws it out. But at the time, her brother was young and not taking toys, and so she hadn't experienced it, but she was okay. And so I think sometimes it's also like, why does that bother me?
Yeah.
Why would I be so upset and activated in this scenario where it's actually not a problem for her? Like I feel like that's also a little bit difficult to differentiate between something that's maybe just a big emotional response, but it's not likely my intuition in that scenario. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, totally, totally. And you don't want them to just kind of inherit things that are triggering for us or our insecurities, because they are their own people. And so it's important for us to just step back and like watch things unfold and see how they would handle themselves in situations. It's really beautiful.
Now, a quick pause to hear from my sponsors.
I'm sitting here on the set of something I'm really excited to bring to you guys, which is the relational e-course called Pillow Talk. I filmed it with my husband, Aaron, and our actual marriage counselor, Dr. Jonathan Kood. And we cover a variety of different topics with this e-course. It's coming out soon, so if you want to be in the know and up to date on when it's released, go to havenpod.com. You can see the little pillow icon on there, put your email in, and we'll give you a heads up of when it's coming out.
Okay, back to the episode.
Do you have a story or a moment from when you were growing up and your mom's intuition came to play?
Hmm. I guess it's like kind of a foreshadowing, but I used to be obsessed with all thing twins. So like the Olsen twins,
Oh,
love.
classic. Who wasn't in our era? My friend solved a problem yesterday, and I literally sent her like the clip of the girls being like, "We're super duper sleuthers." Do you remember that one where they had the twin Olsen and Olsen detective agency?
Yes, yes, so cute. So cute. I love it. Yeah, Full House was just like a whole I love that we had that show growing up. But that Sister Sister and
Hmm.
something in me had this, hunch that it's like, I think I'm gonna have twins. You know? Um,
Wow.
yeah. So I think that's why I had this like intrigue with them early on.
That's incredible that like you even knew that it was maybe going to be some part of your journey. Have you ever had an intuition about one twin and not the other one?
Hmm. I know that they need to be parented differently. And so I feel like how I bond with them is just totally different. My son is very sweet and tender and emo. He's still like, loves roughhousing and playing sports and all of that. But I think there's something so intellectual and deep about him. And so when we have our heart to heart chats, I still just have him on my lap and I'm stroking his hair, and that's like how we relate, and I love it. And my daughter is fiery and opinionated, and I think for her, it's like I relate to her on a level where I want to give her a platform to share, and speak her mind. And for that, I'm like, okay, let me help you with a stage performance or like putting yourself out there and like, getting over any kind of jitters you have about being in a public sphere, because I know that she actually loves it. And so, yeah, it's cool. It's like you just create these um, moments based on what you know your child is going to resonate with, whether it's the quiet ones or the big lofty ones. Like you can feel them out and know what they're going to really be into.
I think that's so true. Like as you're sharing, it's making me think of a moment I had with my son, Echo, who's the same. Like he's very visceral, he's very in his body, and I so much for a long time I was okay, like gentle hands, like trying to do the direction I wanted to, but even I felt like my intuition was saying like stop taming him. Like
Mhm.
why are you putting him in situations where he always has to be gentle? Put him in scenarios where he gets to be the full-fledged roughness that he wants to and it's encouraged. Like
Yes.
get him a trampoline, get him a ball and a bat. Like I felt like my intuition was saying like this is such a great gift in him and you're decaffeinating it. Like you're trying to tame it before he even knows the full force of it. Like let him experience the full force of who he is in appropriate areas to see where it's incredible and it's a gift. Like that's on me that I'm like, oh, we're inside a lot because I like being inside, or like we're in these areas. And so I feel like my intuition is actually like sometimes just course correcting
Yeah.
based on the differences of my children, like who they are presenting themselves to be. And so I think so much of it too is coming of the connection of knowing them and knowing what they like, who they are. But then also, I think it's being quiet enough to listen. I
Mm,
think sometimes when we're so busy, we can just kind of disregard, and it's more convenient for me to say gentle hands than to acknowledge that, oh, you haven't run outside today. That's a me problem. Like this is
yes,
not a you problem that you have energy and that I want you to be calm right now. This is a me as your parent that didn't give you any opportunity to expend what's going on. So I think sometimes even the intuition takes work. Like, I don't think it's as simple as, oh, I had this great idea and I'm going to follow it. It's, well, why is that coming up? And it's a struggle. I think sometimes intuition is a little bit of a struggle to unearth what's coming up because our deep self does know. It's just, are we paying attention enough to access it and then to course correct? Because also intuition is usually saying you need to change something.
right.
And are we willing to do the work to adjust and change based on what our intuition is saying? And it even goes back to I mean, we've all been there. Coco Melon, that show
Mhm.
still creeps me out and haunts me to my dreams. But did I think it was educational? No. Was it something that they would watch and could give me a couple minutes to myself? Yes. Like, I think sometimes it's because it takes so much work. Like, it
Right.
took so much work for you to course correct and be like, here's the food, and explaining it and talking about it and enjoying it. Like, I think also it's many of us, myself included, will disregard because who has time for that? Who has time for what's best? I kind of need what's now. And I think that's where it's a little bit of maybe even our just high paced Western issue. There's not a lot of time to breathe. There's not a lot of time to recenter and focus unless we make the time. It's not going to be naturally baked into our schedules and days or so. My question is, how do you not only find the time, but what does it look like for you to recenter and reconnect to your intuition and really listen to it?
Mm. For me, I feel I do so much of the spoken word with my podcast. I think every single interview that I do on that Total Mom Sense, and even like on our show right now, is verbal and therapeutic. But I feel like there's magic in the written words, and so I make time to journal, and oftentimes it's like right when I get up. It could be, as soon as I get up, just 10 minutes earlier to jot down what my dream was or um, intentions that I'm setting for the day. And if you feel like you only really have time at the end of the day, then, ending on a note of gratitude is just always so comforting, to be like, I'm going to go to bed knowing that I have, these 10 things to be so appreciative of. So I do that, and it's extended to my kids now. So I remember scrolling, and I'd come across this Instagram reel where there was a lady who was leading, an AA group, and she had a young girl come in, and the girl brought her mom, and she was just like, "Wow, they must have such a strong bond that, this." Young 20 something felt like close enough to bring her mom. And so she asked the mom afterwards, what is it that you did to really establish this bond with your daughter? Because she could have brought anyone, and she feels, just this kinship with you. And she said, well, I kept a journal, and in it, I would write entries, slip it under my kid's pillow, and they would write entries back. And there were times
Mm.
where these entries were not even spoken about in person, which I think is so subliminal, and there's a magic there. So I started that tradition with my kids. They each have a journal, and it's not as consistent. The twins are 7, the younger one's 6. But we will pass back and forth. And sometimes it's just a picture or, I love you, mommy, or, you're such an amazing kid, whatever I want to say in it. Or it can be more of, like a free brain dump where I'm like, I had a hard day today. I had to do such and such, da, 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 and so like then they feel like they have the agency and permission to go there when they want to. and they start seeing us as our own individuals with our own, daily wins and challenges, which I think is just really profound. At this stage, when kids are young, they know you for who you are as a mom, but they don't know all the different hats you wear and how you show up in the world. So it allows them to like respect and revere you in a different way. So yeah, it's all about like these written like entries and being in the present and like quiet moments for me.
I love that. I like it because it's also just so unique to what works best for you. And it reminds me of I one time saw an Oprah episode with Alicia Keys, and she was talking about with her mom and her, whenever they would fight, they would write long letters back and forth because they express themselves better in written form. Sometimes it really, we think about the five love languages, like sometimes it's going to be unique for everyone else. And some people need to go and be physically in nature, someone acts of service. But like with the writing, I think that's also just such a beautiful way to have a little bit of, they can download their thoughts in their mind and you have time to do it as well. I think that's such a beautiful example.
Thank
Kanika,
you.
thanks for being on here with me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, thank you, Haven. I really appreciate our friendship and the fact that we can just go through life and this season of rearing our young kids together. It's so, so special.
Me too. It really is just like a unique window of time. So, other than that, like, follow, subscribe, wherever you're listening to this podcast, whether it's Apple Podcast or Spotify or YouTube. When you follow along, then it'll give you a notification when the next one drops. So that helps you stay in the loop. But other than that, thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.
Hello, it's me, Haven. It sounded like the end of the episode, right? Well, it's actually not. Do you remember on Disney Channel when your favorite shows did a crossover episode? Like Wizards on Deck with Hannah Montana, where they would have the cast of Wizards of Waverly Place mixed with The Sweet Life on deck with Zach and Cody and Hannah Montana. I'm playing with the podcast version of that. I had fellow podcaster and internet friend Kanika on my podcast to talk about a mother's intuition and how accurate can it really be. And then we also filmed an episode for her podcast back to back. But we each had hard timeouts with kid pickups on the back end, so it felt like we cut off the conversation right as it was getting good. So I thought it would be beneficial to put some of my interview that I did as a guest on her show embedded into this episode. So our topic was talking a lot about my adult relationship with my own mom, as Kanika was touched by one of the mother-daughter episodes I did with her. So this episode will give you a chance to get to know Kanika a little better. And if you like her style and her vibe, you can check out her podcast, That's Mom Sense, which took me literally until the intro of my interview with her to realize that was a play on the phrase "that's nonsense." So get it, switch, mom sense. So without further ado, here's my episode as a guest on That's Mom Sense, hosted by Kanika, for your enjoyment.
I want to start with your childhood, and something that you share on your website is you've been this curious person who would just ditch the whole family and follow the tour guide when you went sightseeing. And you've also had this entrepreneurial spirit where whether you're launching lemonade stands or your very own babysitters club with friends. So take us back to this time when you were a little, Haven.
Okay, so I think I was even given that opportunity because I was homeschooled growing up. So my mom had 3 kids in 3 years, and she just dove headfirst into being a mom. And she even went the route of specific curriculum because my brother, who's older than me, he was diagnosed with ADHD. So the traditional school was really tough for him. It was really hard for him to sit still and, to focus. And so my mom kind of set up our education of, okay, let's read for 20 minutes and then go shoot basketballs for 15 minutes. And then we'll go and, do a science experiment and then jump on the trampoline. So she made it very specific to like what would work for our family. And so we went to a ton of museums. So I grew up it was a part of our education to go and learn. And I loved it. It was back in the day where you'd have the little headset cassettes and like playing, or if there was a tour guide. I just didn't even recognize that I had a family. I mean, I knew they were back there somewhere, but didn't really care because I was so enthralled. And so I think that's also what fostered curiosity. And then the lemonade stands was because she could see what was interesting to us. And I loved whenever I think I saw it like on some type of TV show and I was like, you could do that. I was like, you can make money because we didn't get an allowance as a kid. So money was
Right.
just like birthdays. And my mom said, yeah, okay. And so we got the supplies. And she said, after you pay me back for the supplies, whatever you have, you can keep. And I just was shocked. I had no idea money was that easy to make, AKA like just like making drinks and people bought it. And so that was just my favorite hobby as a kid with my best friends. And eventually we got our little sisters in where we had it so rigged where they would, we told them to take wagons door to door to the neighbors while we jumped on the trampoline. So like we eventually were delegating ourselves out of working in the business and still making money. So yeah, I'd say that was like my first kind of entrepreneurial experience.
That is brilliant. Oh my goodness. There's just so many gems in this one little anecdote that you shared. I love that your mom took the onus to homeschool the three of you. That is no small feat. And I think the individualized attention that you're going to get from a parent that's truly invested in your success and your ability to thrive, like you cannot replicate that. And I mean, bravo to her to see that it's like this is maybe what some would consider a sacrifice, but she saw that no, this is an investment. I am setting them up for the rest of their lives by doing this. So I have to give her kudos for that.
So much respect. I mean, same. And I really do feel like she felt it was a calling. And I'm almost kind of like, well, I don't feel that calling, but I really want someone to homeschool my kids. I'm
I
like, it was
know.
such a great experience. I don't feel the same draw that she did, but I'm like, is there a neighborhood mom that feels that draw that I can send my kids to?
Yes, I'm with you. I'm with you. Yeah, because it's just there's so many things in our education system, that sadly are flawed, and you get to just,
Yeah.
course correct in the home. I do want, you to speak to the fact that she knew that she wanted to be all in because, in this day and age, I think so many women are career driven and they're too either scared or I don't know, maybe even like feel like they'd be shunned by society and deemed irrelevant for taking that time to lean into family life. But she was like, nope, this is what's best for us and I'm going to do it. So like what gave her that volition?
Well, I think she did the career thing. You know, she grew up a child actress. And so I think
Right.
she had a taste of what success was. And I think she had kind of climbed that mountain. And so I think she probably got the gift that most people think, oh, if I climb the mountain, it's going to feel a certain way. And she's like, I did that, and now I want to focus on a different thing and, lean into the family. And so, especially growing up, like she was on her own since she was age 12. So I think also sometimes we kind of want to create the things that we'd like that we would have had growing up. So I think also she was like, I never got the family dinners around the table or, the experience with siblings around. And so I think she wanted to foster that kind of environment because she saw the value in it because she didn't really get it.
Yes, yes. And then what was it about homeschooling in particular? Because I think there's something to be said here. Again, it's like, we all have the tools. If you go back to it, yes, you can relearn third grade math and pass that on to your kids. But it's difficult and it's a big leap to make. That like, okay, I'm not gonna have the school system do this. I'm gonna, turn it on its side and do it my way. What made her feel like, after your brother Tucker, that you and your sister Clancy would also learn at home?
It's a great question. I never asked her specifically, so I would just be guessing here. But we grew up a family that really valued faith. And so I think also she wanted to be able to kind of incorporate that in the curriculum as well. And so I think that obviously there are different, like we could have gone to like a Christian private school, and we actually did one year in fourth grade, just I think because we were begging her, I saw all these kids with backpacks and we're like, Mom, they get to wear backpacks and they have a lunch pack. Like, can we do it? And then after a year, we were like, it's not as great as it seemed. So I think she allowed us that one.
Mm.
But I would guess it's likely because also she wanted to, she always described it growing up as like young children growing up in a greenhouse of it's not a bad thing to shelter them until they're strong enough to stand on their own. And sometimes the world's elements come in too harsh and too strong to something that's a little too fragile and too frail and too impressionable. And so I think she kind of viewed it as I'm going to keep you guys in a safe greenhouse until you're able to make some decisions that I think that wouldn't rock you when, you know, the intensity of the outside factors come in. So I think she just saw it as, you know, world's really tough. I'd like to prepare you as best as I can before exposing you to things that really could destroy your little hearts.
Yes, yes. Oh, that's beautiful. And I love that she was this lioness protector in
Mm-hmm.
that way. And you mentioned your faith, and I feel like that's really the cornerstone of your upbringing. Your father's a pastor,
Mm-hmm.
and tell us about some of the values that they really instilled in you.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much of just who they were coming out, the values. So I don't know if it was ever like these are the specific values that we do, but I think it was also like forgiveness is a big one, you know, especially with siblings close in age. And
Uh-huh.
I would say we fought a ton growing up. Like we fought so much growing up that I'm glad we're friends as adults. Like my birthday's coming up this week and the only thing I want to do is go to Disneyland with my siblings. So that's what we're going to do Friday. So I'd say we're very close as adults, but as kids, like we fought tooth and nail. But one visual that really struck with me is my mom would always include like Bible verses as she was kind of teaching us things and even instructing us. And there was one time in particular where my brother was just, he continued to say like some cruel things. And so my mom had him take a hammer and nail, go outside to the backyard, to the fence, and hammer these nails in. And then
Hmm.
later she had him come back and they were all rusty and crusty and decrepit. And she was like, okay, like after a couple, days of them in the sprinkler. And she said, okay, remove these nails. She was like, okay, your words, you said those harsh things. And even if you say you're sorry and you try and remove them, look at the damage it left. Look at that's what is happening to your sister's heart when you say harsh things. And even if you say you're sorry after a while, there's still something left there. And so she would pair that with some scripture and give us kind of the visual there. So I would say it was just infused in everything she did.
Wow. Wow. I'm getting choked up just thinking about that. And I think
Mhm.
that is something that I definitely want to pass on to our kids that um there shouldn't be this like, oh, you're kids, so you're gonna tease and annoy and all of that, because
Mhm.
that is gonna shape who they become as adults. And
Mhm.
we need to let them know that, we have to respect each other's feelings and the impact that it has on our hearts. Because yeah,
Yeah,
those
even if
past.
it's siblings, it's those harsh words, they linger.
Right, right. Absolutely. Could you share, a gospel song that you grew up listening to that you still think of fondly?
Yeah, when I think of my mom, I think of how she would sing "'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus." And the specific part is like, Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, how I've proved him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. And so that's kind of what I hear in my head when I picture, even a little lullaby.
Oh, that is the sweetest thing.
Yeah.
Well, she had all three of you so close together, and this just hits home for me because I had twins and then my
Mm.
third in 18 months. So I also
Wow,
have,
girl. Are you
yeah.
okay?
Now I am. Now they're 7 and 6, and I feel like it's like a whole new wind.
Amazing.
Yeah, yeah. But when we were, in the trenches, the three in diapers, we had three different colored bottles. I nursed them all. So like I was like permanently pregnant or leaking. And
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
it was a fog. But do you like well, obviously you're not going to remember when this happened, but then has she told you about how she got through those days now that you're a mom? Like how did she get through that? tough time.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a question I now ask as a mom. I was like, how? Like that's just my only question is how? I have no idea. She did tell me, she was like, the saying of sleep when the baby sleeps? She goes, I'm not kidding. She was like, nothing happened in the house. She was like, I just, like, especially when, my brother Tucker came, she was like, I just would knock out when he slept, when you came. Like, so she really was a big proponent of like the nap schedule.
Yeah.
And that we took naps way later than we ever should have. Like, I would say we were taking naps up until we were like 7 or 8 years old, and then it was also just quiet time in the room. So I think the way she did it was she was very, very structured, and my mom's a really strategic thinker. So I think she just saw it as like, these are the blocks. She would have a literal Excel spreadsheet for us as like toddlers, I found in a baby box, where it was like a row was each of our names, and then no, the columns was each of our names, and the rows was like the time. And I would say it was almost like 15 or 30-minute increments, where it's like, okay, when Tucker's doing reading time, Haven's doing crafts, Clancy's taking nap, or like all of these things. And so I think she was just so specific and on top of it. But I would say it was just because her life was the kids that whole time. I think she
Yes.
just threw herself into it. I still to this day, I'm like, I don't know how you did it. It's
No,
crazy.
I know. We have so much to learn. And I think, I find myself aligned with parents who um, are so like invested in their kids and think about that. It's like, what can we do to build them up, to have these teachable moments, to pass on these life lessons? And it's not something that like, it'll work itself out. They'll be fine. No, no, when you have parents and caregivers who are like, I'm intentional about this and I'm going to pour into you, I really think the dividends come later and we'll all appreciate it at the end.
Yeah, I think kids feel that. I think kids feel the intentionality and the focus. And,
Yes.
when you're not distracted.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Um, One thing I learned from the podcast that you recorded with her, and we will tease this in our show notes because I can't wait for you to hear the interaction that Haven and her mom have. Um, I love that she parented you all differently. Your own unique individuals, and it's like she could pinpoint like this is going to resonate with my older one, and this is going to resonate with my younger one. And she made this analogy of like a box of crayons, and was like for Tucker, it's going to be just the main colors that you get in a standard box. I don't think it's like 7 or 10, and it's the fire engine red and the sunshine yellow, and it's what you see is what you get. And with you, she said, it's all the jewel tones.
Mhm.
It's just those magnificent, like midnight blues and fuchsias. And then with your sister Clancy, it's the fluorescent colors, the fun hot pinks and neon yellows. And I just thought that is so, so fun and brilliant. And like to know you could share that with your kid and then
Mhm.
they'll see it too, that like we really are different and colorful in our own way.
Yeah, and it also just felt like, one, good to be seen, to have your mom see something in you and speak words over you, but also the differences that don't equate to different values. She always said growing up, like, I parent you differently because you're different kids. And so
Mm-hmm.
she would parent each of us differently. So I was never the kid growing up to say that's not fair, because we were all unique. And so she was going to handle everything uniquely with us. And so I think it also kind of set the tone that I see the differences in you and I value them, and I see the differences in your siblings too.
Yes, yes. And there's so many things that she did that was just so ahead of her time because there's all these child development experts and parenting coaches that are writing books about it now. And she was already
Mhm.
doing it a long time ago. So I love it. One is the independent and guided play. And I actually just released a series with Bright Horizons. They're a known daycare and elder care facility across the nation. And I was joined by Claire Goss, who is a child education expert. And she spoke about how play matters. The segment is called Play Matters with Bright Horizons, and how it's just how kids show up in the world. And your mom knew that there's the guided play where it's like, I'm going to teach you something. We're going to build a block tower. We're going to, color in the lines, whatever it may be. But then there's the independent play where it's like, okay, I'm going to send all three to their rooms or outside and let them figure out what they want to do. There's no such thing as I'm bored. Use your imagination and your curiosity and don't be bored. And I love that. Can you take us back to those moments where you're like, yep, she carved out time for this, and this is what I did with my independent playtime?
Yeah, firstly, it's so cool you're doing that partnership because I think it matters so much. I think it should get out there into the world more. But absolutely, I think part of it was the necessity of 3 kids. Like you just can't entertain 3 kids. And so how can we make that happen? But I will say, my mom had a group of girlfriends that came over for a game afternoon. I would say it was almost as frequently as like once a week. And it was during the afternoon. And they would send all of the kids outside and they said, you're not allowed to come in unless you're bleeding. And they're like, everyone else can figure it out. Like, truly, you cannot, even if we're having fights. She was like, unless you're bleeding,
sort it out. Yeah.
You don't get to come back in. And so we sorted it out, us and our, these kids, and we would just play. And so I think it just caused so much time for imagination. We had a pool. There was like a little design of like, you remember like the 90s, like designs of like dolphins on the bottom of the pool?
Oh, yeah.
Like, so we would go down with the dolphins and we were like mermaids, or, we would do something with pirate ships, or it gets a little dangerous when you let kids do independent play because we would jump from the trampoline into the pool. And then we had this little gazebo kind of like covering like over like where the outside table was, and we would jump from that to the trampoline to the pool. So we also like, it taught us a lot about risk. It taught us a lot about, conflict resolution with other kids. Like I think it also just the independent play is not only good for the imagination, but it's also good to just, give a kid confidence that they can handle life, by themselves. Obviously the moms were looking out the window. We weren't drowning, but
right.
Unless it was a real issue, they needed their mom time. And that also taught me that my mom prioritizing herself there was important. And it was actually more important than me then. Like,
yes.
My quote unquote necessarily needed to be paused so she could take care of her needs. So I think that's also great. Sometimes I feel like our culture is like drop everything for your kids and, be 10 to everything. And I'm like, I don't know what message that's putting on kids is like the pressure of you're the world, you're the center. It is important for kids to know, nope, sometimes you orbit, sometimes you're not the sun.
Exactly. Oh, exactly. And I think, we can't coddle them so much because eventually we will want them to spread their wings. And so they have to learn, I think the younger the better. So that's really amazing. The other thing you mentioned at the top of this interview was about the allowance and not getting any. And, the same kind of went in my household growing up too. So many kids did get allowance. It's like, oh, you mowed the lawn. Here's $10. It's like, that just didn't happen in your home. So how did you reconcile that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just saw it as like, this is how we contribute to the family. It was never having like a monetary tie to it. I also want to add the caveat of we were privileged growing up. Like I never was hungry. Our fridge was full. And so I think that also, I can't deny that that's the factor there too of, birthdays, I would get gifts and Christmases were wonderful. And so I also don't think it was like this deep, intense longing. But I would say that like my mom every morning, she gave us a printed piece of paper with the chores we were supposed to do that day. And we had to check them off. Each of us, we got our own piece of paper with what we were supposed to do that day. And she would make sure it was done correctly. And so it was just a part of life growing up in there. I remember when I was becoming, I think like 13 or 14, my mom said, okay, like, back to school season, we typically get you clothes. Now this year, like you're old enough to get like a babysitting or other jobs. So we're going to pay for the necessities, AKA like generic shampoo and conditioner, your food in the fridge. But if you want to go to the movies, if you want special hair care, if you want outfits that are nicer than just the back to school things, that's on you.
Yeah.
And so I think it was also like they gave us the necessities, but if we wanted anything extra, that was on us. And it gave us incentives to do it. Where if I wanted, Tresemme hair care, I had to go find a way to make that extra like $12 difference than the Suave generic she was going to buy,
Right, right. Oh my God, that's brilliant. I love it. I mean, I would have just blown all my money on at Claire's.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
yeah,
Claire's.
the best, right?
I
You
mean,
can never
butterfly
have enough.
clips.
Yes, dangly earrings, like
No,
accurate.
I feel like cherry print was
Little.
really big back then. I thought it would be everywhere
Hmm.
all the time.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, that's also teaching them, the value of a dollar and like where they're willing to splurge because they had to work for that. Um, that's so great. I think another component that you both uncovered was just being so self-aware of your parenting and looking back. And, Haven, you and I will do this when our kids, go on to have their own families, and we'll laugh about it.
Mhm,
But back in the day, one paradigm that existed was like spanking, and then
mhm.
later on timeouts. And thankfully, we don't have that. We're much more woke, if you will, where we can have get down on their level, have an eye to eye conversation about like, how are you feeling? How do you feel in your body? Is there anything that you think we're gonna just like kick ourselves about later and be like, oh, we shouldn't have done that?
100%. And if I knew it now, I wouldn't be doing it. Like if I could look in the future
True.
and
That's
my
true.
kids can come and tell me, I would be like, you're totally right. How silly is
Right.
that? But I don't know yet, but I'm 100% certain they're going to when
Yeah.
my kids have their own kids, they'll be like, "Wow, mom, we don't do that anymore." Or I don't know, it's as silly as I was watching a Bluey episode. That might be a little too young for your kids, but are you familiar
Yeah.
with it?
Of course we know Bluey. Yeah.
Okay, there was one where Blue was trying to learn to crawl, and the grandma was like, "Oh, just put some oil on her knees." And they were like, "Grandma, like we don't do it anyway that way anymore." And then she was like, "Let me throw some gravel on the ground." They like pulled Bluey out of the scene, just like joking, like 80s parenting.
Right, right. That's hilarious.
And so I'm sure maybe it's not something as intense as something I regret, but it's just like a total old school way of doing things that like isn't going to translate later.
It's true. Yes. Yes, I know. Like the jury's out. We don't know what that is yet. Um, but we'll regroup.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do
Just
another podcast in 20
yes.
years, I'm sure. Our
We'll
kids will
put a
like to
pin in
leave that
this.
one.
Yes, yes. And then they can interview us and whatever.
Mhm,
It'll just come full circle. Um, Another thing that she created that was a really sacred time was window time.
mhm.
Tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. So, and you said in the show notes it'll go to the episode, but she
Yes.
describes it more beautifully because it was her concept. But essentially, at night when we were about to go to bed, when kids are all trying to delay that inevitable bedtime, my mom's like, I'm going to capitalize on that. And I'm going to, she saw it as a window into our souls. So she would call it window time, and she would come sit on our beds and we would save up anything that we wanted to talk to her about that day, anything that was special. And we didn't want like our siblings to steal the focus, or anything that we were maybe ashamed about or confused, or, maybe wanting to even confess and just bring to light with her. And so it was a really, really sacred time. I never felt rushed as a kid. I felt like I really got to share everything that was on my heart that day. I feel like I had my mom's full attention, where, during the day, you don't always feel like it's the undivided attention. So it was really, really important. It was really special. And yeah, I did that well into my teens.
Wow. Wow, that's so, so beautiful.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, one
yeah,
of my
that's
friends, when
something.
I did that episode, she was like, "I remember I came over for a sleepover." She was like, "And you guys did that." And I had forgotten that, like, oh yeah, even when I was like old enough to have like junior high sleepovers, we were doing it.
Wow, yes, and I think that's a big takeaway for the listeners today is create that window time with your kids. They just need it more than anything, and they're gonna just feel so full from that. Oh, it's really, really profound. I do
Mhm.
something similar called magical mama time, but it's not every day. It's whenever I
Mm.
can take one of them to do an activity. But yeah, I think it needs to be more consistent than that, especially if you have multiples.
It's also just the most vulnerable state that they're in before they drift to sleep.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And then their heart isn't heavy anymore. They just,
Mm-hmm.
everything's lighter. They really do have sweet dreams after that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and now let's move into how, your mother-daughter relationship evolved and, how she first told you about like puberty and when you're
Mm-hmm.
a teen.
Yeah. So, well, when it comes to the telling about puberty, I remember my mom always kind of being upfront of like, okay, eventually, like, you're going to start your period. And, it's a sign of womanhood. So I was psyched. I was like, when's this happening? I'm
Yeah.
ready. Like, I want to be a woman. I was
Yeah.
so excited to get boobs. I got a
Same.
training bra and I was like, when do I fill these things out?
Right. Yeah, we got it way ahead of our time. It was like, okay.
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
So she kind of prepped me and I was like psyched about it. So and then I think it translated over time with adolescence is I feel like she continued to move the boundaries back and give me
Mm.
space that was age appropriate. A lot of my friends' moms never really moved the boundaries for each age, so they would feel confined and trapped. And even like when we were going somewhere, if we were driving and talking in the back seat, another mom chiming in, I'm like, what are you doing here? Like, you're not invited into this conversation. Like, I remember being like kind of like shocked when like other moms would involve themselves in their daughter's life unprompted. Like, my mom
Ah,
always gave me this space to come to her, and I would want to invite her in because she was never trampling in my space. So I think that's the difference is I feel like my mom definitely had outside boundaries, but she sat me down before high school and she said, this can either be an incredible 4 years of your life. I want to give you enough freedom to enjoy it. And there are certain things that we're going to expect of you. But if you don't follow those, guide rails that we expect, these 4 years are going to be really tough for you and they're going to be really frustrating. You're going to have privileges taken away. She was like, we don't have you know, huge, massive amounts of like rules, but the ones we do, I expect you to follow. But there was so much freedom to play, and she would adjust them with age that I never felt trapped and I never felt claustrophobic. And so even when I got my driver's license, I loved driving to school for like the first couple weeks. It felt so amazing, but I missed my mom driving and picking me up for our conversations. So at 16, I was like,
mm,
can you please still drive me to school? I was like, I
wow.
just miss it. But it was me asking her. She never was pushing pressure. And so I would see my friends who were just trying to run away from their moms because they were trapped. And I was like, yeah, she's there when I need her. I don't need her
Yeah.
as much as I did before, but when I need her, I definitely need her.
Yes, yes. What were some of those boundaries that like she kind of outlined? Because I want to just download everything that she's done and then have a powwow with you. And what are you doing with kids? Like, yeah.
I know. Well, again, we were pretty it was we are kids of the 90s and it was a really strong like faith time then. So she basically was saying like don't drink, don't
Mm,
smoke, and don't have sex. Like
yeah.
those are the specifics. And here's a
Yeah.
curfew.
Yeah.
And like those are like the biggest kind of pillars of it there. But
Hmm.
I was like, cool, those are big. The only one that it was maybe tough for me is when I had a boyfriend I fell in love with. Those got a
Yes.
little trickier, but I was like, yeah, drinking doesn't sound interesting. Smoking sucks. Like,
Hmm.
curfew, I would just ask sometimes. Like she also gave me always permission to ask. It wasn't like arguing, but it was, hey, there's this one certain movie, like, can we please come home later? Or, sometimes it was yes, sometimes it was no. But it was also never like this is my rules and my life. Like I had built enough trust with her because especially as a kid growing up, the thing that crushed my heart more than anything was when I broke trust. And I didn't want to do it often, but when I did, she was like, okay, now we have to rebuild. Like you've broken my trust. And that takes so much time to come back. So I had felt what that felt like as a kid to break her trust. And I never wanted to break her trust. And so I would rather be upfront with what I wanted to do and what I was trying to and tell her than have her find out another way and then we break the bond.
Yes, yes. Oh, wow. Wow. There's just so many life lessons there. And again, it's like the onus is on you
Mm-hmm.
um to have integrity. you know? And speaking of high school, that is where you met your husband. You two were high
Mhm.
school sweethearts. Tell us all the deets.
Well, yeah, it's crazy. So I wasn't allowed to date till I was 16. So I could
Mhm.
go to school dances with people, but not date. But again, I don't know if this is just my personality. I was like, awesome. Now I can just hang out with friends and not have pressure of like, who I'm going to date or who I'm going to like or who I'm going to let down. Like it also, the boundaries gave me a ton of freedom. Like the inverse of it was so much freedom. And so
Mm.
I just genuinely enjoyed hanging out with friends. Like my husband now, his name's Aaron. We were in a band together. Like I play drums, he plays guitar. We had like 5 of our friends over every Friday night to play music and then like bake cookies or go to hide and seek or like play shows. And so we were friends for about 2 years. And then right before I turned 16, I was like around like 3 months or 2 months shy of it, like 15. He was like, I really like you. Actually, before he did that, because he knew that rule, he was friends with my brother. They had been friends before. So he told my brother, and he was like, I want you to know, like, I like your sister, and I think I want to, like, date her. He was like,
Mhm.
but I want to make sure it's, like, cool with you because we're friends. And he said, yeah. And then I think my brother's like, she's not allowed to date. You got to talk to our parents.
Yes.
And so then before he asked me out, he went to my parents and he said, I know that one, you have a rule like for her not to date till she was 16. And two, he was 2.5 years older. So he was 18 at the time. He's like, I also know
Mhm.
that I'm 18. And he was like, obviously we've been, friends. And my mom essentially was like, we've known you for 2 years. Like we know who you are. We feel more comfortable with her being with you than like guys her age at 16. So like you have
Right.
our permission. And so then he asked me out. And so he had permission. So that was one of the boundary rules, but they didn't hold them so hard and fast that would make me want to rebel or do things in the shadows or hide. They were like, okay, yeah, sure, you can date a couple months before you turn 16. So then we
Yeah.
started dating, and we were like best friends, and we both went to the same college nearby. And I never thought I would marry my first boyfriend. I literally told him I would be like, you're such a great first boyfriend. Thank you for this experience. Like you set the bar high. And he would be like, we're still dating. Like, why are you calling me your
That is
first
so
boyfriend?
sweet. Yeah. Because yeah,
And I was
you were
like,
just wise.
yeah.
But yeah, I love that it worked out.
Well, yeah,
Oh
I
my
really just thought he was just a great first boyfriend and giving me such a good experience. But yeah, we just, kept going.
For the long haul, yes. And then what about the journey into parenthood for you and Aaron?
Yeah. So when we first got married, we said, okay, we'll have kids in 3 to 5 years. Like that was kind of our plan. But we got married super young. It was like 2 weeks after I turned 21. So then we
Mhm.
hit 3 years. We're like, this is way too fun. Let's not ruin this with like the landlocked nature of kids. Let's kick it out, So we kicked it out to like 5 years.
Mhm.
And then I remember waking up on my birthday. I think it was like my 26th birthday because it was 5 years in. And I was like, I'm ready. Like Aaron was always a little bit ahead of me. He was ready to date before I was thinking about it. He was ready to get married before it was on my mind. And he was ready to be a parent. So he's always just, maybe it's just the nature of our relationship. He had said that before. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I'm not certain. But then I was like, I'm so ready. But then you know how it goes. I had enough friends that had dealt with fertility journeys where I was
Mhm.
like, we could get pregnant in a month or, 3 years. You never ever know.
Right.
So I at least had the grace of supporting friends who had gone through that to know there could be some issues here. And so ultimately, it took almost 2 years for us to get pregnant.
Mhm.
Our daughter came when we had been married for 7 years, and we were just thrilled. Like, waiting so long for something, it tastes sweeter to me. And so it was
Yes.
just very, very, very special. And then, when she was 4 months old, the day after I went back to work from my maternity leave, then the pandemic happened and the
Mhm.
world shut down. I went back home. And that actually, obviously, those circumstances were pretty wild. It was not like painting as something that I would see as like a whole wonderful scenario. But for us, then we got every single day of her life for the first year of her life, for a year and a half, almost 2 years home because LA was locked down for a while.
Yeah.
So the timing of getting to have this newborn
to give you a reason to get up and walk and play and laugh during a really, really confusing, dysfunctional, depressing time in our world was incredible. We got the most bonding parent life with her to be with her. And we're working parents. So we would have otherwise not gotten those like precious times together. But yeah, having a kid in a pandemic was definitely a really strange experience.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I like that the lines got blurred with home life and work life. The kids definitely did benefit from that.
Yeah.
And so did we. So did we. And do you have a mom sense moment that you can think of? And by that, I mean a time where you just blindly trusted that inner voice that we have. And I know we rely on it a lot, but if there's something that just sticks out in your memory.
I would say it was when we put my daughter Isley in preschool, and she was 3 years old. She'd been speech delayed. So we had her in speech therapy, and she was really working on her words, and she was like finally starting to access. I knew she always understood things, but she was able to vocalize and access it and go to school. And, not only the pandemic kids were they kind of a little bit more like less inclined for the social stuff, but they, it was just a whole new world going to school. And so it was a big transition. So I remember a couple months in where I was doing a parent teacher conference with the teachers. And I was like, well, what's Isley like, in class? They're like, well, at this moment, she still doesn't say a ton, but you can see everything with her eyes. Like she can tell you everything that she's thinking and feeling with her eyes. And she was like, and I can tell like if like kids are getting a little loud and rowdy, she'll kind of like put her toys to the side and just kind of look at you like what's happening with them. Or she was like, she expresses a lot. Then they were like, but she's really shy. And so work with doing some play dates with some other kids outside of the class. And I came back, and as part of me is like, yes, of course I want to give her access with speech therapy and social tools like preschool. But I was like, I don't think shyness is a problem to be fixed. I don't think that's something I need to work on with her personally. I disagreed, and I love their teachers. So it's never a knock on that at all.
Right.
But I was just thinking, I don't want to put this pressure of her in these scenarios if she's not comfortable. And I learned there's a woman I follow, Dr. Becky. I love what she talks about. But essentially, I found this later because that was my intuition, but I didn't have a lot to back it up. But she was like, shy kids are confident kids. You don't want them when they're 16 to go with peer pressure. So if the kid is like not comfortable doing something and you force them and say, no, look, every other kid's doing it. Why wouldn't you go out? They're having fun. Can't you have fun or talk? Or, you're shutting down their inner voice instead of saying, okay, when you're ready, I trust you. You know yourself. You know your body when you're ready. So I think my mom's sense was that shyness is not a default I need to work and coach her on. I actually need to let her develop and trust herself, and she'll do things if and when she's ready and when she wants to.
Yeah, I think it's so important for parents to hear that, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert or whatever your Myers-Briggs assessment tells you, your child is hardwired differently and they're going to show up differently in the world. And so you don't need to nudge them in any direction. That's great.
Absolutely. I just want to champion who she is.
Yes, exactly. And lastly, I just want to tease, something that you're working on with Erin, where you are really exploring couples dynamics. Because I would love to have you on again where we go through that. But tell us about it.
Let's do it. Yeah, we just filmed a relationship e-course called Pillow Talk. So it's my husband. We've been married for 12 years. And we brought in our actual marriage counselor that we've been seeing for 13 years because we saw him before we got married. And he's taught us so much about what like a healthy dynamic of a relationship looks like, and helped us kind of like as like the scaffolding early in our marriage, and now more like tune-ups. But I was thinking, there's so many, when people come to my podcast, I took a form and I was like, what are you here for? What are you listening for? And a lot of it was relationships. The number one was marriage. A lot of people were really interested in the dynamic I have with my husband, and then parenting, and then friendship. It kind of goes under the umbrella. But I was like, we've learned so much over 12 years of our own experience. And so we created Pillow Talk, which is essentially like relationship prompts for you and your spouse or partner, where it's a e-course that's broken down in specific modules. You watch them, and then there's like a pause where you talk together, and there's different PDFs. And so it's me and Aaron and our counselor, Dr. Kood, of specific themes of how can you get to know yourself better? How can you get to know your spouse better? And how can we learn like what's actually happening, in our bodies, or what are the patterns here? And so our first course that we're releasing is called How to Fight Better. And it's all about conflict. And even I'll tease even a little bit of the line that I'm still like ruminating over is most of the issues, this is a Gottman study, are perpetual issues and not, solvable issues. So it's not even really conflict resolution. It's conflict regulation. And how can we work on that together as couples? And so I'm so thrilled about it. I loved filming it. If anything else, if no one, purchased it, I was like, well, I learned a lot and I loved it. But I think it's going to be really, really cool for couples to kind of go together through it. And so my husband and I, we've done some premarital counseling for a couple other couples over the years. And so we also got input for them of like what helped you and what we talked about and what were the takeaways. So we tried to modify what we've done before, but then kind of make it online accessible to a bigger audience. We can't do one-on-ones with every couple that we'd like to. And so how can we, make it a little bit of a broader reach?
Yes, yes. Oh, this is brilliant. Oh my goodness. I can't wait for this course to drop. And, I've studied Gottman and read a lot of books on counseling, and my husband and I have done that together too. So yes, I think it's preventative, and it's so important that all couples have a discourse like that. So this is really, really exciting that you're providing it for them.
Awesome.
So
Yeah, I'm
great.
excited too.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I loved our conversation, and I'll include all your links below. Definitely subscribe to Haven Podcast. And anything else you want to share with our audience?
I loved it. I mean, I'm assuming it's mainly moms listening. So I just want to say, as someone who grew up with a great mom, you're making all the difference in the world. Like the things that the little seeds you're planting that no one's seeing, it feels like you're just watering dirt. They do grow and they do blossom in our hearts. And they're things that we carry through our lives. And maybe we don't have the words, especially as children or young adults, to thank you for it or even recognize what you're doing. But there is going to be a time in our lives where we do see it. Maybe it's when we have kids, or maybe it's when we have like a big life event. But then we're going to look back and be like, oh my gosh, look at all my mom did for me. And just the profound gratitude. I'll say it if your kids aren't there yet. I'll say it on behalf of them in the future. But thank you for all you're doing for your kids.
Oh, sweet. Thank you. Thank you so much.